Welcome to Heartland Town Hall. I'm Dave Kendall. I've been associated with public broadcasting in Kansas since the early 80s, producing documentaries and hosting the Sunflower Journeys series for more than a quarter century. I still produce programming that airs occasionally on local public TV and radio stations, and I tune in to public media every day, relying on it as a source of trusted news and information. Like many of you, I've been quite alarmed by the elimination of federal funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and I'm concerned about the impact this is going to have on our local stations. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We have three guests joining us who are directly involved in the management of their stations. And by we, I'm referring to my co-hosts, my wife, Laura Mead, and our good friend, Martha Farrell, who's going to introduce our guests and get the show on the road. Martha.
Thank you, Dave. This episode of Heartland Town Hall is very close to all of our hearts because the three of us have all had connections to public broadcasting. I was a freelance underwriting announcer for Radio Kansas for several years, and as a video producer, I was able to produce two documentaries that were made possible because I partnered with KTWU and I could write grants. So, it's all very important to us, and we have three guests today. They come from around the state. Quentin Hope is from Garden City, Val VanDerSluis is from Topeka, and Ken Baker is from Hutchinson. Our format is that each of our guests has the floor to talk uninterrupted for several minutes, and when all three are done, then we'll have a conversation. We'll begin with Quentin Hope. Quentin is Executive Director of High Plains Public Radio in Garden City, and that's in Western Kansas, of course. Hello, Quentin.
Hi, Martha. First of all, thank you for pulling this together, because as you said, we've all got deep roots and deep concerns about the future of public media in the state and in the nation. I thought I'd start with some background for those of you here on the screen, as well as those who will be viewing, who may not be entirely familiar with High Plains Public Radio. Every station has its own story, and here's a little bit of ours. We're a community licensee, which means that we're an independent nonprofit governed by a local board and really solely dedicated to fulfilling our mission of serving the civic, educational, cultural, and artistic lives of individuals and communities across the High Plains. And by across the High Plains, we serve a broad area of Western Kansas, Eastern Colorado, and the Oklahoma and Texas Panhandle. So it's quite a large region, nearly all of it very rural. We offer three primary programming services. On the broadcast side, there's HPPR Mix, which is news, information, and a variety of music and other programming. HPPR Connect, which is all news and information. And then on hppr.org, our digital service, regional news, information, interviews, events, and the like, including content curated from many other stations in the state and beyond. We've been in operation for 45 years now. It's our 45th anniversary, and basically built out over time. We started with one station in Southwest Kansas, and then through the years, as there was interest in adjacent areas, community by community, county by county, built out to a network of now 18 stations. The defunding really comes at a time when we'd already been rethinking and really trying to reimagine how we can better serve the region, given all the changes that have happened in the media environment. And you think about, since 1967, when the Public Broadcasting Act was started and the beginning of stations really began nationwide, a lot has changed. But really thinking how we can better serve needs and interests of the audiences, and in doing that, greatly grow our audience reach and broaden our base of support. Now, the defunding of CPB has certainly presented some very new existential issues to address, and it's really greatly raised the bar for realizing any aspirations we have. But it's also, I think, added urgency and determination. I know we've certainly felt that among our board and among staff and among our supporters, a real determination to move forward. And that's what we've been working on the past few weeks, really since the rescission vote in the Senate. And we've got a fairly comprehensive plan. We call it the Moving Forward Plan that we'll be launching in September. And there are really two pieces to it. One is bridging, and the other one is building. The bridging, as you might imagine, is about the money. and raising about $550,000 in additional private support to cover the 2 years of funding that was lost when CPB was defunded, money that we were counting on both in terms of grants and support services. And to provide runway, basically to build the base of local support to be able to sustain beyond that period. It's very challenging in an area like ours, which is very rural and relatively sparsely populated. But we've been encouraged so far. Lots of new contributors, even from around the country, long lapse members contributing again. And even we've had a couple cases in the last week of supporters who lined up new business sponsors for us. And they were the ones who could get it happen much better than we could. And we've also been messaging to our audience and to our supporters since December about the possibility of defunding and just how it works and what we would need to do if we lost the funding. The other part of building is the good news part of the story, and this goes to the aspirations. This is an initiative to create what we're calling, it's kind of the working title, the High Plains Civic Media Network, which would be a greatly expanded regional news and information service based on a really new operating model centered on developing a region-wide contributors network of probably somewhere between 60 and 80 contributors in different roles, providing content on an ongoing basis with a core editorial team. This is possible, although we've been planning for a year. It has been possible because about the same time we heard about the defunding, we heard about receiving a major grant from Press Forward, which is a national initiative concerned with the loss of local journalism. And that will give us the core funding to move forward with the initiative. And I really see it as a way of expanding the public media model, first by better understanding and serving the real needs and interests and perspectives of the audience, including there's a good bit of research that we'll be doing, just to understand where people are getting local news, what the gaps are, what they're looking for, and help that to guide our coverage of topics and issues that are common across the 4 states that we serve, because it is in a region of the High Plains where there's a very common geography and environment and economy and community life. Also, it would be much more digital, primarily digital, in fact, on websites, social, newsletter, and text, because it's where audiences are. And through that network, more direct ties into local communities. And part of this is the trust building that I think needs to happen with local news in the sense that, one reason why the national polls show that people trust their local news more than national news or other news is they know who produced it, and they may see them in the grocery store, or they know someone who does know them. So I think, getting beyond the studios and really having presence in as many communities as possible is all part of it. But it's all by way of saying, and I'll wrap here, that it's a very challenging time, but I really see it as an opportunity for public media as a whole to really rethink itself and even better serve the public, whether it's here in Kansas or anywhere in the nation.
Thank you so much, Quentin. That was wonderful and very informative. I get the opportunity to introduce Val VanDerSluis. I've never worked in public broadcasting other than as a volunteer, but public television has been an important part of my life since childhood. I grew up in the country in rural Vermont, where we had only 2 commercial channels and a 3rd channel that came in really fuzzy, no matter how you move the rabbit ears. But we did have public television, which came in great. And I loved all the children's programming growing up and all the nature shows too. I didn't understand how it was different. I just knew that PBS had all of my favorite programs. And here, years later, I find that it still does. I'd like to welcome our friend and Dave's former coworker, Val VanDerSluis, who is the general manager of Topeka's PBS station, KTWU. And Val is also currently the chair of the Kansas Public Broadcasting Council. Thank you for joining us, Val. I look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Martha. Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be on here with Quentin and Ken, all familiar faces. Really great program we have happening here. So Val VanDerSluis, I'm the General Manager, Executive Director for KTWU. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary this October, so been around for quite a while, and we're going to keep coming around for quite a while. We are here to stay. I know we've had some extreme challenges recently, as we're going to be discussing today, and create some creative opportunities for us to move forward and continue to be a service to our community. But KTWU offers three separate channels. We have our KTWU HD channel, KTWU Enhance, and our KTWU World channel. And all of those provide a little bit of unique content to appeal to as many audiences as possible. We cover the entire northeast side of Kansas. We do reach into the areas of Kansas City. So we have our partner station there in Kansas, KCPT, in Kansas City, Missouri, that we work together with. And we also do have a translator that's down in Moran, Kansas, to serve the Southeast Kansas viewers. So in a sense, the eastern side of Kansas is our primary broadcast territory. So yes, we are facing a $970,000 per year deficit with the loss of federal funding that happened on July the 17th. And this is all a navigated territory that all of us are going through, and but we're keeping our heads up. We feel like it has brought our team together even more. We have a fabulous team of about 24 folks here that have all come together to work on a major giving campaign that we are launching. We are also a licensee of Washburn University, so we are working with our licensee to talk about various ways of partnership and funding that can help sustain us as we move forward. I do know that there are some large groups and philanthropists throughout the country that are also coming together on a national basis to see how there could be funds put together to be able to assist those stations that have been hardest hit with this whole issue, and just a whole number of other things. Working with corporations, individuals, members, just really expanding out upon our traditional member base to see how we can survive and make it through. And I say how we can survive. It's not how we can survive. It's we will survive. It's just going to be a different process moving forward. And like I said, we're going to be creative. We will still be here as a community member. We have lots of community services and resources available. We do offer the PBS Kids channel, which does help in the early learning development for our youth around the entire state, in preparing them for those kindergarten years. We all know that no longer are the years where I didn't have preschool. I went into kindergarten, and I didn't know a whole lot about ABCs and numbers and colors, and they taught me that. But now when you go into kindergarten, it's kind of an expectation that you already have that platform of knowledge. And that's where PBS Kids does come in to be able to assist in the 50% of children across our country that do not have access to early childhood education. And that is an extremely valuable resource that we want to be able to continue to offer as we move forward.
Thank you, Val.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our third speaker is going to be Ken Baker from Hutchinson. Ken is the manager of a 3-station network called Radio Kansas. Its home is at Hutchinson Community College. I do want to share that when KHCC first got started in the early 70s, my dad, whose name was David R. Mackey, was one of its biggest proponents. And that was interesting because Dad owned and managed the commercial radio station across town, KWHK Radio. But Dad knew that it was in the greater good to have public broadcasting, that there were things that public broadcasting could do that as a commercial radio station, he could never make happen. So, Ken, I know you have been at Radio Kansas all your working life. Love to hear what you have to say.
Well, not quite all my working life. I spent a little while doing roofing and carpentry, but I kind of self-taught in a lot of the things that we're doing. You picked a great spot to start, Martha, with referencing kind of other stations and how even commercial stations have been an important part of our history. It's that relationship to the rest of the dial and the fact that so many other stations are doing so many things so well that gives us that mission and helps to refine the expenditure of resources at Radio Kansas. So we run very economically. Martha is, if you're curious, she really is still the lead voice of what we call our positioning statements, our statements of purpose, our short spots that tell you what we're up to and why. And one of the main things we're up to as a public broadcaster is, like all public broadcasters, trying to provide things that the commercial model just isn't going to provide. And it's not a shame. It's not blameworthy. It's nothing that the other stations should be ashamed of. It's simply the fact that they have a different mission. We're here to make it so there's something worthwhile on your FM dial. Ooh, that rhymes. And sometimes we note that it is a cute little couplet. But we're thrilled to be owned and operated by Hutchinson Community College. Our relationship of the board of the with the board of Hutchinson Community College is probably the best thing about the station. They recognize that the communities that we serve really deserve the sort of programming we provide. We are based in Hutchinson, but we are considered a part of the Wichita metro area because we put what's called a city grade signal into all of Wichita. That means even if you're behind a grain elevator or a bus or a truck, odds are good that the signal is strong enough it's going to bounce off of a building behind you and you're still going to experience FM. Again, because of that relationship with other stations, I'll be right up front. Wichita has an excellent NPR station, a public broadcasting radio station that provides NPR, provides access to the network NPR. And because they do their job so well, that allows us to instead serve with what was traditionally kind of the other half of radio public broadcasting, which is classical music in our case. We offer primarily classical music through the day, but we, like all broadcasters, recognize that morning and evening drive time is extremely valuable. And we do use that for news. It just happens to be that we have no NPR. We instead have products primarily from BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, also from WGBH in Boston and KERA in Dallas. And it's really amazing the journalism that's taking place all across the United States at stations that might be located in metropolitan areas that have, frankly, deeper pockets than a local public radio station in Kansas. But the journalism is truly extraordinary. We don't intend to be your sole source for news. We intend to be an alternative source for news. We intend to corroborate the other news sources in your life or give you reason to question those other news sources. That does make fundraising a little bit different for us because people don't and aren't expected to be quite as, let's use the word excited about our news programming. People don't identify with our news programming on a political level. They don't identify with our news programming on a socioeconomic level. It's just evaluated, as it should be, for the quality of the journalism that takes place. Again, we're glad to be owned and operated by Hutchinson Community College, and we started with that single FM tower. We actually shared space for the first years of our life with KTVH, Channel 12 in Wichita. We, because of digital broadcasting requirements, they had to kick us off that tower. We had to work together real quickly with other people like Quentin at the time specifically and others at KTWU where Val is to secure the funding to build our own tower there. And that tower happens to, again, not just throw a great signal into Wichita, but we have now joined it with two other stations through the years that provide service to North Central and West Central Kansas. All of the programming on Radio Kansas exists only through the economies of scale generated through that mixed urban and rural service. As a rural station, and we did qualify with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for an extra bonus. And so our funding lost amounts to about $235,000, which, depending upon the year, constituted about 15% of our budget, which is very, very typical for stations, well, radio stations across the United States. We are, of course, hoping that, well, you always want to be an optimist and see the bright side of things. And of course, this very public loss of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is certainly addressing one of the main misconceptions that audience members have had for years, that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding paid for everything or paid for enough that they didn't have to contribute as individuals. Now, we need contributions from people, but mostly what we need is votes. We need people to let us know what works and what doesn't. We need that engagement. We're willing to accept very small pledges in exchange for just recognizing that someone took a moment to choose what programming on Radio Kansas earned their faith and trust and ultimately their pledge. So we're maybe taking a different approach, and I'm thrilled to see how active Quentin's station is able to be and how they had an affirmative plan in place already. At Radio Kansas, at least in my chair, our philosophy has been it wasn't the quality of our programming that caused this situation. In fact, it's kind of ironic. We're one of the few stations in the United States that does not carry either NPR or PBS, the stated targets of this funding, and yet we happen to share in that loss. There were Native American stations in the north central part of the United States whose elected officials worked to secure some extra funding because those stations were kind of recognized as being caught in the crossfire as well. We didn't get that sort of luxury, that courtesy of singling us out as someone who was kind of blameless in this. But we are working just as well as we can with the stations all across the state that find themselves in this situation. But again, we just don't see a lot of changes in programming or staffing or other things like that, because those weren't the problem. And we don't expect those to get us out of the problem. Instead, we'll do our best to grow income primarily through individual listener donations, and we will try to be fleet-footed in the coming years.
Well, thanks for the explanation of what's going on there, Ken. I appreciate that, and appreciate the comments from Val and Quentin too about what's happening at your stations. And at this point, we're going to get into more of an open discussion where we can follow up with each other. And Quentin, I wanted to ask you, come back to you. A couple of months ago, I think it was back in June, I sat in on a town hall internet session where it was you and and the public radio. I think Ken was there too. A town hall talking about the situation. And at the time, the House had voted on the rescission, but it was still going to the Senate at that point in time. And the thing about the funding situation, a lot of people probably don't know about the advanced funding formula with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and why that was brought in. So you might say a little bit more about that and clarify what this rescission amounted to, as opposed to what the forward funding normally works. And also, at the time, you sounded somewhat hopeful that Senator Moran, who was on the Appropriations Committee, might not vote in favor of the rescission. Didn't turn out to be the case. So anyhow, what are your thoughts on that?
So just to clarify on the advanced funding, one of the unique things about the funding of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the fact that I think since 1980 or so, the law was changed so that the funding wasn't so. The FY26 funding wasn't part of the FY26 budget. It was actually 2 years in advance. And the whole purpose of that was to protect it from political pressures and also to, I think, provide more reliability of funding to stations. So the rescission was particularly, I'll say harmful and abrupt because it had to do with money for FY26 and 27 that had already been appropriated. It was actually sitting in the Treasury, ready to be released to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting October 1st of this year, and basically was a take back of that funding. So it's a disruption, not just the loss of funding, but of the timing. It would have been different, if there'd been a 2-year runway of continued CPB funding, but that's the reality of it. In terms of the Senate vote, which was disappointing, and a reminder too, the House vote it only lost by 2 votes, and there were 3 Democrats who weren't present. So that was the real squeaker. But I think my read on the situation was there were so many other issues because CPB was one of 21 rescission pieces, the rest having to do with foreign aid, that senators like Moran basically were prioritizing. And in particular, he focused a lot on the Food for Peace program, which was the one piece that was not rescinded. And there's a long history of that program within the state of Kansas. So I think, it was a pragmatic vote. And I think, in general, very supportive of public broadcasting, but just dealing with the realities of the extreme pressure to pass the rescission with, I think the preference would have been no amendments, but with as few amendments as possible. So I think part of this to recognize too is, don't mean to go on too far here, but if you wanted a roadmap for what's been happening in public media, not just with the funding, but with the FCC and others, it was all pretty clearly laid out in the Project 25 report in terms of the attacks and bias, the justifications, rationale for why we no longer need to support broadcasting. There are lots of other choices in the media, and it's greatly grown. But the whole rationale and the whole game plan was pretty much laid out, and it's continuing too, I would say, because there are other potential threats on the horizon having to do more on the regulatory side than on the funding side.
And Val, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts too. I know you go to Washington D.C. I don't know, or have been on an annual basis, I think, to lobby our representatives, and I suppose it's a bit frustrating when something comes out like this and they're not there for you. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it is frustrating, and and it's sad. I am a Kansan, and I love Kansas, and I am, I'm also someone that votes on who aligns with my values, and sometimes that's Republican, sometimes that's Democrat. Um, and so when I want to be able to speak to our representatives, I'm hopeful that they want to speak to all of their Kansan constituents and give them that fair time and listen and hear, rather than allowing national political endeavors and requests to kind of steer their decisions. And I don't know whether or not if that was the case with our Congress, but it is frustrating when we do a request to be able to have time to speak with them and you don't get a phone call back, or you're constantly talking to staffers. Their staffers are great. I've had great conversations with them. So I think they're wonderful. I just, I feel like as a constituent, public broadcasting or not, that what, we all need our time to be able to voice our concerns and be able to articulate to our representatives the value that we bring to the table. And so, yeah, I have to say, I think there have been some tears shed, and some very, just disappointment and my perception of, I feel like representation is not happening clearly on behalf of constituents. I feel like there's a lot of pressure on the national political side of things to encourage our representatives to vote in certain ways, and that our voice is clouded because of that.
Are there attempts now to continue lobbying Congress, and perhaps in the next budgets, upcoming budgets, perhaps getting some restoration of funds? Is that part of the process?
Yes. We can't give up. While personally, it is really hard to continue to reach out to people who aren't supportive of your services and what you offer in Kansas. And it's hard to get yourself back up and say, okay, we're going to keep going. And so I do want to reach out to Moran's office and Marshall's office and Schmidt. And I do want to still engage and interact with them. I want to have them here at the station and invite them and see if they can see what it is that we do, the people that we serve, their communities, and the impact that we have. So while it is difficult, when you're faced with an impact like we had with the result of the rescissions package, we can't give up. We continue to reach out to them, invite them to be here to see us. And then also, yes, there is appropriations for FY26 that are still happening. There are still efforts being made to include public broadcasting in those funds. And that will continue as each year goes on. If FY26 pans out or it doesn't, we will continue then with FY27. We have election programming coming up that we want to have them in our studios to offer election coverage and forums to be able to allow our constituents in Kansas to hear their voices and make educated voting decisions each election season. And we will be reaching out to all of them to be a part of those. And so just because they have voted a certain way doesn't mean that we become silent and we disappear. We have to continue to move on.
Dave, if I might add the point of Valerie's, although this has all been very disappointing, I think one piece of messaging that really did get through, which was not well understood before, was that by defunding CPB, you were really defunding local stations because that's where most of the money went. And I think there is a better understanding of that, which I think does open the door or provide a new pathway for what Val was talking about in terms of maybe a different form of funding through a different vehicle that would be more direct to stations and more focused on local programming, where the pretty unique parts of the service are provided. So, I think everyone who, called their senator, called their representatives along the way, on behalf of stations, I think that part of the message got through and it's something to build on.
Yeah, we appreciated that so much. The amount of people that came together, the millions of calls that went out to Congress. That was tremendous, and it did speak volumes for sure.
I want to dig a little deeper on what you all have been saying. So 50 years ago, when public broadcasting was founded and implemented, the landscape has changed so much since then. And so many of your critics say there are now so many sources of news and information. Why do we need public funding of public broadcasting? Aren't we covered somewhere else? So I'm sure you get asked that question a lot. What is your response? Ken, do you want to answer that one?
Well, yeah, I'd love to because I talk frequently, and I don't hear it as much from peers across the United States. But we talk frequently about how so many Americans choose to seek personally curated news. In fact, if you sign into your Google browser and you go to the news site or if you haven't signed in as an individual yet, you open your Google browser, it'll say, hey, don't you want to filter your news and hear about the things that are important to you? And that'd be great if that Google News page was the one source that people on the internet filtered in that way. But one of the most important things I think about broadcasting is that the news that's taking place is not being filtered for you. It's by someone continued to actually be objectively important material, news about how other souls are experiencing the day and suffering, and folks in a democracy whom you may have a role in asking your elected representatives to protect, if that's the word you want to use. But I'm not going to be the person that debates us back out of the whole notion that customized, curated news is somehow superior to a broadcast news service. We try during our fundraisers to emphasize that, when you hear a story you couldn't care less about, that's part of broadcasting. That's part of public broadcasting. When you yell back at the radio, that's part of public broadcasting. And so, yeah, to me, there needs to be a medium that has a cost of entry that makes it so its most likely format is not curated, subdividing the public, a form of distribution that requires a broad base of support. And then in retaining that broad base of support, that journalism is carried out in front of experts all over the world, any one of whom could call our news programs, our news sources, our networks into account for and often do. So that's maybe a long-winded answer to your question, but I believe that the expense of broadcasting, the fact that it has to appeal to a broad base of people, is part of what keeps it impartial, or as impartial as we can be.
Quentin.
Yeah, to build some on what Ken was saying, I mean, that criticism is certainly true on the national level, just such a range. And it's everything from podcasts to blogs to complete streaming channels and the like. But much of it is segmented, and it's got its own reasons and motivations for being, some of which are about power and politics and things like that, others of which I think are good sources. But what's missing, and I think this is where we're really focused, is at the same time, local journalism has been hollowed out. There are probably only a third of the journalists employed today in local markets that there were, depending on your benchmark, 10 or 15 years ago, because of the consolidation of ownership. In our area, of all of the daily papers, and none of them are daily anymore, there is only one which is locally owned. All of the rest are owned not in adjacent areas, but by national corporations. And the loss of local news and coverage has been considerable. But I think that also poses a challenge for public media, and I use the word media intentionally, to be on the platforms where people are. Because if broadcast has many advantages, but it's not where a lot of people are. And when we think about broadening our audience, we need to be on digital platforms. And I think that's particularly true in the news and information side. And I see that as a huge gap that public media has been trying to fill, and it's made real strides in the last 5 or 6 years, but it's a gap that just keeps widening. You've probably heard the term news deserts. And it's, there may still be a paper there, but it's got, in the case of one I'm thinking of in particular, an area, it's got about 1/10 of the staff it used to have.
Yeah, and I could come into the mix, related to the question and all the other options available. And on the PBS side, we are offering, as well as the radio side too, we're all offering free over-the-air broadcasting, and there is not internet available for everyone in the United States, and that's where we're able to come in and to be able to offer and fill that gap. A lot of what you see on streaming as well, you can sit your kids in front of a streaming platform and put on whatever it is it's streaming, whatever it is, it might be on Netflix or Prime or whatever it is they have a subscription to. But has all that content been as heavily scrutinized as you can get with the content that we have on public broadcasting? And, the CPB would not fund kids programming unless there was a board associated of experts, researchers, educators. If you had like Molly of Denali, they went to Alaska and had that community, Native American communities, be a part of the planning of this series to ensure that what was being represented is absolutely what is indicative of those communities. And so, it's highly scrutinized programming that to make sure that it is appropriate as an educational resource that has educational values instilled within each episode for children. And I'm using kids programming a lot as examples, but it's that is where, in my opinion, a lot of the focus of what it is that we're able to offer to those communities that don't have access to those particular resources, and being able to fill those gaps with things like PBS Kids. And there's also, the PBS, the Nature, the Nova, This Old House Hour, a lot of these programs that come to the table with the effort to educate and provide a platform for discussion. And you can't get you can get entertainment everywhere. You can subscribe to Netflix and Prime and Hulu and all of those and be entertained on a regular basis. But not everybody has access to that. A free over-the-air signal with multiple channel opportunities is what all of us are able to offer, and that is what is at loss with a loss of federal funding for some stations.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just, as I'm listening to you all, I realize that one of the things that Ken said is this idea that it's exactly right. When I am listening to public broadcasting, I am surprised, not infrequently, by something I've heard that I've never thought about. And when I'm on the commercial stations, that doesn't happen. I know if I tune into this station or that station, kind of the tenor I'm going to hear. And I'm very rarely surprised by anything that's being reported on commercial stations. And yet when I'm on public, continually, there's surprising content, new ideas, things that really are a much broader spectrum. And it just, I appreciate you pointing that out, Ken, because I hadn't thought of that. And Val, as you said, the other thing that I'm aware of in addition to children's programming is documentaries. The term documentary means a very different thing on public broadcasting versus commercial. The kind of background vetting, information, trustability of some things that are being called documentary. You can self-upload on certain websites and call yourself with no oversight at all. And you can call it a documentary, and it's something that you've produced in your backyard, and it's on some of the major networks of streaming. That's disturbing when when you realize that the quality that you get from public broadcasting, there's a whole different criteria of vetting and oversight and information that's gone into that I think really is a powerfully strong thing. So thank you. What I was really curious about, as you've all been talking about, and Quentin brought it up right at the beginning, which is there's an interesting opportunity in this. It's not that this defunding is a good thing. It's not necessarily, of course, but there is an opportunity, an awakening, an opening that happens. And I'm curious from any of you, what would you like to see coming out of this kind of tumultuous time? What would you like to see in the future of public broadcasting, and not only funding, but just, the kind of openings that are happening right now? I'm just opening that up to any of you.
I guess
nobody wants to go first.
You want to go ahead, Ken, or you want me to go ahead?
You go ahead.
Okay. So I will say what this is doing for us, and COVID did the same thing for us. It pushes you beyond boundaries that you didn't realize you actually could go. And so, for example, COVID pushed us into utilizing technology for a lot of our local coverage and our local content. We did some election forums virtually with people on Zoom calls. I even had one of our candidates was sitting in the back seat of his truck for an election forum, and so it changed the parameters of the things that we can do. Now what we are seeing is as live now, as I'm even on this call, I have a team of folks that are pulling together every resource possible to launch a major giving campaign that is an annual sustainable goal, that so it's not just a one-time thing. We understand that when you lose $970,000, that's just for the current fiscal year we are in right now, and we need to make that for this year and next year and every year beyond. So we've had a lot of people come together to come up with ideas of ways that we can not only work now but into the future to help sustain what it is that we offer to our communities and the services and programming that we have. So yeah, I think that while we've always had it, it's pushing us now. We have to get this done. We've had ideas, but you get so used to the daily grind of everything. Okay, we'll do that idea later. We're doing good right now. Well, we can do that idea in another 6 months, 6 months time. Well, you just kind of get into, I don't want to say a complacency pattern, but you get used to the daily operations. And now it's daily operations plus, okay, almost $1 million a year. Holy moly, like wow, and so it's pushed us to think beyond, be more creative. There are also discussions on ways that as far as what kind of public media funds might be available on a national level. I know on a national, Paula Kerger, I know NPR has been the same in looking at different philanthropists and trustees and big corporations and seeing what kind of funds could be utilized that would help to be able to continue sustaining public broadcasting. But, and I know there's a lot of discussion too around, does this change your model of what it is that you do in your operations and your fundraising? Can you become more commercialized? And yes, that has pushed us into those discussions, but those are discussions that are great to have now. But in an era in which we are still fighting for federal funding, trying to change the SEC designation of nonprofit to profit and trying to make something like that happen at the moment, we're looking at things, but there are things that just at the moment don't work quite yet, but possibly 5 years down the road may be something we have to look at in order to be able to survive. So yeah, just with your question, right now it's just pushing us in ways that we haven't had to before. So
yeah.
There was something I heard actually on NPR a couple of days ago about this new bridge fund. Have you guys heard much about that? What that is going to amount to, or what they're doing with that? Quentin, I see you're nodding.
Well, I was going to say my understanding of it is working with major foundations, MacArthur an example, Schmidt, and it's really focused on first identifying those stations that are most vulnerable in the sense of actually potential of going off the air. 137 or so. They do tend to be predominantly in rural areas, many on native reservations, many in Alaska, but also many public TV operations for whom, the federal funding was 50, 60%. So the idea is to raise the money to replace the CPB money that was lost for the 2 years. That's sort of phase one. Then phase two is to work with those stations for a sustainable model going forward. So it's got both it really is an emergency funding as well as what's the plan going forward? So I think that will help some stations. When you're in the range, like Ken mentioned 15% of the budget, it's about the same for us. We're sort of at that range where I think the thought is you can do it on your own. Let's be sure that from a nationwide point of view, we don't lose the system that now serves 99% of the population.
Yeah, you mentioned 50% of funding in some cases. I know that's what the situation is with Smoky Hills Public Television. So
yeah,
that's a pretty big hill to climb. Sorry, Ken, I interrupted you.
No, I just wanted to volunteer. I'm not sure that Quentin mentioned it specifically, but the bridge funding has been stated to be available or being made available for stations that have 30% or more. That would be the threshold. And Quentin's absolutely right. And you're right too, Dave. KOOD, Smoky Hills Public Television, is the only station in the state that would crest above that threshold. We, of course, as a rural station, and I'm sure Quentin too, would love for them to kind of recapture that rural versus urban threshold and count stations like ours. What Quentin and I have that urban stations don't have is a big power bill, which translates in a business sense to a high fixed cost that we can do nothing about. It's either on or off. And but to answer Laura's question from earlier about how this creates opportunities, I think Val kind of hit it on the head when she kind of suggested that in some ways we will need to become more commercial. And I would cage that in a nonprofit phraseology and say we need to become even more responsive. But what it really means is that programs that we have supported explicitly with CPB funds, and I don't mean exclusively with, but these programs have been explicitly supported through CPB funds because it's really not possible for the constituency we're serving to cover the costs for that programming. That CPB funding was actually divided into two chunks, one referred to as restricted and the other as unrestricted. Even the unrestricted must be spent or had to be spent on programming expenses. And for us at Radio Kansas, we would essentially backfill the bills on programs that had a number of people voting for them, but maybe those folks are an audience that we don't necessarily serve so many hours per week that they're absolutely rabid about the station and they dig into personal savings to make a regular donation. But those federal fundings allowed us to federal funding kind of allowed us to be more non-profit than broadcasters really can afford to be. So yeah, I guess, one thing we're trying to prepare our audience for is the fact that there are so many viable, constructive, helpful formats for broadcast stations, for public broadcast stations all across the United States. And yes, right now we serve primarily retirees and near retirees. Our median age is 70. Our median age, half of our audience is older than 70. And of course, that creates opportunities to chat with them in a certain context from a giving perspective. But a lot of those folks simply have done what they're going to do for the community in the past, and we, on the financial side, need to find those other resources. So we'll do our best. But again, for better or for worse, there may be other types of service out there that we will be, I hate to use the word forced, that we will be pursuing because there's just not that charitable effort that used to be so supportive.
If I could go back also to the question about what are we going to do differently, broadly stated. First, I want to absolutely iterate what Val said about there is opportunity here because you are forced to really rethink your use, the formats you use, the platforms you use, your production processes, the technology you use, the use of AI and any of those things that basically make us more productive and also more effective in terms of the programming. So I think that will be a good thing, just in terms of it forces an unfreezing and a reckoning. The other thing, which is something we haven't talked about as much, if I could mention, and I think this comes from, serving an area which is very conservative. I mean, there aren't any purple, there aren't any blue cities or counties. Overall, in the last 3 elections, the vote in the counties we serve has been 79% Republican. And we have a board member who is in a county which has the distinction of, I think, having the highest Republican presidential vote this last election of 94%. And she refers to needing to destigmatize public broadcasting and public media because there is so much media which is being consumed by individuals who don't listen, who don't know, but they've heard from someone that it is biased, that it has an agenda, that it is a threat to you even. And I think we need to address that directly. And I think part of the key to that is, we're all comfortable with it. We all grew up with it. We've all dedicated good portions of our lives to it. But realizing that there are audiences who I think are interested in the content, who are missing local news and information, who actually I think resonate personally and in their family and community lives with the very values we represent, but we're not reaching them. And I do think the local programming is the key to that. And what I think has changed in recent years, which I think led to the votes, was there are those who were stigmatizing public media. And it's a message that if you listen to certain parts of the dial, you'll hear day in and out. And you've come to believe it, not by experience, personal experience or knowledge, but by what you've been told. And I think that's part of the challenge of public media, to have deep enough roots in wide enough areas of the community to where they realize this is a valued local institution, just like the public library, like the community clubs that we have, like the things which hold our community together. We may not all have the same politics, but this is a good thing. And I don't think we have to change our values to do that.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. And I wonder if it seems like that this time may give an opportunity or a window to open that conversation in a new way. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping, that, if it comes back around again, there's even a wider swath of the American public who realizes the value of the public good provided by public media.
Yeah.
Because of direct experience with it.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a good point to end on. I think, in a sense, there's some necessity to reclaim our integrity in terms of the reputation, because I think there's been some damage there. I mean, we've been referred to as radical left monsters, and that there have been bias, and coming from members of Congress, they say there's obvious bias in NPR, in journalism, and it's like, is there? I think there's a lot of stuff that's questionable, and there needs to be some confrontation of those sorts of stigmatizing, labels. So good luck with that, you guys.
Hey.
Glad to be out, huh?
Yeah. We have a 4-step plan. It'll take 2 weeks and we'll be there.
Right.
Just one weird trick
Yeah.
will solve all of your problems.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm supposed to wrap up here, so I wanted to thank you guys, Quentin and Ken and Val, for joining us today. We do appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and thanks to whoever's out there in the ethers watching this, and hopefully it's worth something to you, and that perhaps you'll encourage your friends to watch. Please be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll be notified of upcoming shows. And check out the information we have available on our website at heartlandtownhall.com. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.